Hello, everyone. I'm joined today by some Canadian friends. I have Aaron Terrell and Aaron Kimberly. Aaron Kimberly, you may remember we spoke to both Aarons before, but Aaron Kimberly, you may remember we spoke to a few weeks ago about a kind of intimidation campaign that's been launched against him and other trans men by Morgan Ogre over there. Hello, first of all, both of you.
Hello.
Thank you for joining me
Hello.
today. Can you first of all tell me how is that going? Can you give people just a small refresher of what happened with Morgan Ogre recently?
Yeah. So the thing that she's taken issue to is a letter that I co-signed with dozens of signatories by the Women's Liberation Front. Now, if anyone doesn't know who they are, they're representing, for example, incarcerated women who have been assaulted by trans women in prison. And so the letter that I co-signed, all it really said was that we object to a gender identity framework being used in the writing of international law and policy. And I'm sure we all sign that for different reasons. My concern with it is that it's a philosophy. It's a philosophical way of understanding the nature of what it means to be transgender and to have gender dysphoria, and it's not a philosophy that I personally agree with. And I don't. So her accusation is that Wolf is a hate organization, and that by co-signing that letter, it was an act of hate against the trans community, and that therefore, as a mental health clinician, that I'm in conflict of interest in my profession for advocating for harm to be done to transgender people.
Right. And Aaron Terrell, how did you come into? Have you received a kind of attacks in the same way?
No, I haven't personally. I've just been working closely with Aaron on some stuff around gender dysphoria and being basically specific in what we're talking about gender dysphoria and how that relates to males versus females, and just kind of separating the trans narrative from, or the gender ideology narrative from the reality of gender dysphoria. And so I just, when this started happening, just started working closely with him to kind of fight back, as it were.
Yeah. Now I would go on to Kenneth, but it says here his devices aren't connected, so he seems to be having some trouble getting in touch with us. But I'll go back to him when he arrives. So you two are well, I was going to say obviously, but it's not obvious. You two are trans men, and here he is now. Sorry, excuse me. And so you've obviously undergone massive changes to arrive at where you are today. How on earth is someone like Ogre allowed to pretend that you don't have a kind of a valid experience to bring to this conversation?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, not all trans people think the same and act the same and believe this, and believe in the same politics. And Aaron and I are definitely on the same page. We've talked about this quite a bit. And our circle of trans people, it's almost like there's two completely separate trans communities, and we have different ideological ways of understanding our trans experience. And I think both sides of that debate should be heard, especially when the UN was seeking input into its process. She's on social media saying that I attacked them. They sought input into their process, and we provided them with our opinion as it impacts me, as and other trans people. So yeah, it's and I wonder to what extent is it a conflict of interest for Morgan, who's working at the UN level on a women's committee. How is that not a conflict of interest for Morgan to be on the UN committee, meanwhile doxing and harassing somebody who provided the UN input when the UN sought input? That seems problematic to me. Especially when,
probably one of the few people sitting on a women's committee who tried to defund a rape crisis center. I don't think, some people, I know I talk about this a lot, but I still think it's the worst thing Morgane has ever done. I won't, excuse me, I have on principle won't use Morgane's pronouns, so I'll just avoid the issue. But I think it's the worst thing they've ever done. And it seems to me that what's happening here is a similar attempt to shut women up or silence women, except it's natal females who are now trans men, if that makes sense. It feels like the old kind of the old sexism, the old kind of sexist dynamics of men speaking over women seems to be very much in play here.
We were saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Let me bring in Kenneth because he's caught up with us. So I'll just bring him in now. Hello, Kenneth. Thank you for joining us. You're appearing from the moon, it looks like, but that's okay. I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Kenneth?
A little bit. My connection seems to be not that good. My computer was complaining about being set up through my phone. So
okay, we were just kind of talking about Morgane Ogre and her attacks, Morgane's attacks on the three of you, and talking about how it seems that certain dynamics that were present that have always been present of males speaking over females seems to be true in this case too.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, is that something? I mean, when you talk about the fact that you have an ideological difference of opinion with Morgane on this one, is that something you see reflected across a lot of people in the trans community? Do you notice this kind of ideological battle going on a lot at the moment?
Yeah, the Morgane perspective seems to be the dominant one right now. That which seeks to ignore and erase sex, as a reality, because it's inconvenient to the gender narrative, and then our camp is basically saying no, our biological sexes are very, very important to our needs, our healthcare, our experiences of transition, our experience of gender dysphoria. It's all very important to include in the conversation, and so it is completely opposing interests there.
Yeah. And would you say that this is at the moment a kind of a niche take in the trans community, with the kind of wider, more kind of fantastic view of the trans experience being the one that holds dominion at the moment?
Our take does seem to be niche, and I think you guys would agree with me on this, but it's only niche as of the last 5 years. Like the what was the radical take, 10 to 15 years ago, is now the predominant take, it seems, or at least amongst the vocal faction of trans activism. But yeah, our take does seem to be currently niche, but it's more just a return to the previous understanding of what it means to be transgender.
Yeah, and I think your take is probably niche, but only within those circles, because outside of those circles, most people's understanding of trans, it remains the same. Like, yeah. For instance, I think a lot of people think when they're discussing trans people, they're discussing transsexuals, when of course we know that the trans umbrella has widened out so much that transsexuals are actually getting a little bit lost in the debate at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've talked about this, as a group before too, that it, isn't it ironic that the transsexuals, and I would put myself in that category, that the transsexuals who are just trying to live our lives as the opposite sex are the first to admit, well, but we're not actually the opposite sex. And I don't see how that way of thinking really serves me either, to just deny that I have the biology that I have, and the health implications for that, and all of the memories that I have prior to my transition as female. I mean, I grew up as a girl and lived as a lesbian for many years. So how does it benefit me to do this sort of mental gymnastics to rewrite many years of my history? And I don't think people understand the psychological harm that does.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry, Kenneth, what were you going to say? Yeah.
Well, to what Aaron was saying, how does it benefit me? Like, I'm my nieces and nephews' aunt. I'm my brothers and sisters' sister. My cousins still refer to me as Kelly and as she. how is it of any benefit to any of those relationships? I mean, they knew me for 35 years as Kelly. To go about requiring them to change that.
Yeah,
right?
and yeah,
Because
absolutely.
what I'm doing in my life is about me. It's not about them, if
Yeah.
that makes any sense.
Yes.
And how does, I mean, my first girlfriend was my girlfriend. We lived as lesbians together for 3 years. I still see her and talk to her occasionally. How does why should my gender identity require her to now edit a part of her history from
Yes.
30 years ago?
Yes. Why should it require her to why should it require her to kind of support someone's personal view of themselves? Like I one of the things I found in this is that there's an extremely aggressive policing of language in this this debate, and it seems to me that it's you know, it stands to become completely counterproductive, as people will end up resenting it. You know, and I think that sorry. Anyway, I actually don't have a question to come at the end of that, but I should have. So do you formed an organization that is trying to shift the conversation a little bit around this and take it away from some of those positions?
Yeah, so the Gender Dysphoria Alliance Canada started as a very small organization. Ken and I were working on it together, and we had partnered with Scott Nugent as well. And the idea was, I don't feel like that we're alone in our ideological stand on this by any stretch. I just think that we're not as well organized. I think that's been our fault, because none of us were actively involved in politics. We just went off to live our lives, and I'm not connected to the trans community, and Aaron and Ken aren't either. And so it was actually a surprise to me that the politics had changed as much as they had, because, players like Morgan Ogre, who are very highly involved in politics, and resort to bullying tactics if anyone gets in their way. I think that's how those ideas have now risen to the top, and they're speaking on behalf of all of us. And I think a lot of trans people who are just out there living their lives are completely oblivious to what's happening, and the inevitable backlash on us. I think people are seeing, there's there's a report here in Canada and in the newspaper about how saying that transphobia is on the increase here in Canada because of the TERFs. It's like, you know what? It's not because of the TERFs. It's because that the activism has become so violent and nonsensical that people are starting to push back on that. And so I feel like it's important that we start to organize on our side, to support one another in unity to push back on this, because there's safety in numbers, and people need to know that we're not all on the same page about this. So it's meant to kind of collect people so people can start to tell their stories that are counter to that narrative, and it's growing really, really quickly. So we're taking it international. I mean, Aaron Trell is American, and Ken and I are Canadian, and we have people that we know in the UK and all around the world that think the same as we do. So we're trying to just organize as a united front.
Yes. Do you think, like, my theory on the reason why trans activism is so toxic is because it appears to be, for the most part, there's a few exceptions like Chase Strangio, but it appears to be male driven for the most part. It appears to have a kind of male view of what power should look like, in that it's aggressive, it's violent, it's threatening. Would you say that's fair?
Yes.
I think that's fair. I mean, I'm kind of drawing from a lot of my lesbian activism in the past. I saw how that work got done to form community and to build bridges with people. I mean, gay and lesbian civil rights, I mean, there have been moments where it's been aggressive, but we won civil rights by building bridges with people. and helping people to trust us and see that we have something valuable to contribute to society, not by bullying and threatening and intimidating people and getting them canceled from their jobs. This activism has taken a very different character over recent years. So I think, certainly Ken, because Ken and I have similar life histories as lesbians in the past. We're kind of doing the potluck thing, metaphorically speaking, the lesbian potlucks, and using the personal is political and telling our stories as a form of activism. So, I mean, that's a very female way of doing activism.
Yeah, and it would seem to me that some of the activism, some of the more toxic activism, seems to be from activists who use their trans status more like a kind of a battering ram. They don't really want to be like. I noticed that you just do not see many trans people, trans men, trans-identified females in the politics a lot. What's great about this is it sounds like you'll be helping give those people a voice.
I hope so, because I think a lot of people, I mean, trans people aren't immune to the fear that other people, are experiencing, that if you say the wrong thing, that you face a very violent backlash. I mean, we're not immune to that. In some ways, we, by coming out as we are, we get it from both sides. I mean, we get people saying, well, you're disgusting because you're trans. And then we also get people saying, well, you're the trans community saying, well, you're disgusting because you're throwing us all under the bus. And we're not immune to the abuse, and that dynamic has existed within the trans community for as long as I can remember. I entered into it 15 years ago, and there were definitely key players at that time, mostly trans women who kind of ran the show, and were intimidating, especially when you're a young trans man, and I felt intimidated by them. At times I felt, even afraid of them. There were some prominent trans women in the community that I adored. There was a woman that I got to know quite well, and Ken knows her as well. Jamie Lee Hamilton, and Jamie was abused quite harshly. Ken, I don't know if you heard, I'm talking about Jamie Lee Hamilton, who I know you've met in the past as well. And I'd heard, from various places in the community that Morgan had been quite abusive towards Jamie Lee, and had said things to her like, I can't wait for you to die so that I can erase your legacy. So this kind of very brutal activism isn't new. I think it's just we have experienced it within the community for a long time. I think now the rest of the world is starting to see that as these people have risen to positions of power, and now have the ability to cancel and abuse the community as a whole. But this isn't new for us.
Yeah. I mean that tallies with something that I'm sure GNC Centric, who's a detransitioner who attended Morgan Page's LGBT or trans support group, and what was fascinating about that was Benji said that her and the other trans men in the group were often very young. The trans women were much older. And she said she saw what she thought were inappropriate relationships going on between some of the older trans women and the younger trans men. So again, those dynamics are still exactly the same as they are in an unqueered space. Men are dominant. But the thing that was most shocking to me about it was that GNC told me, and I've heard this repeated by several other detransitioners, that they would be told they had male privilege, and that they shouldn't be speaking too much, and they should be allowing the trans women to speak. Have you heard of this kind of dynamic? Sorry, Kenneth, you're nodding, so can I ask you? What have you heard about this kind of dynamic? Yeah.
Well, I had been involved with a lot of women's stuff when I was in Vancouver, and I began transitioning. And you were required to attend a trans support group that was being run by the Trans Health Program in Vancouver. And when I talked about grieving being kicked out of women's spaces, it was the trans women afterwards were quite comfortable explaining to me that what I was feeling was inappropriate because now that I was male, hadn't even started testosterone, haven't even been diagnosed yet, just had to go to the... Anyhow, now that I was male, it was...
Damn it. That's a shame.
He's Ken is a truck driver, so he's on the road and is probably using his phone as a hotspot.
Oh, I see. Right. Maybe. I think he's trying to
hopefully
connect through a different thing. Oh, come on, Ken. That was so interesting. Well, anyway, let's. What about yourselves, Aaron, Terrell? Have you experienced this kind of dynamic?
I haven't as much. I have not been really in the trans community all that much, or not really involved in any like sort of support networks or conferences or anything since the very early days. I only became aware of the direction about 3 years ago. But yeah, I'll let Kenneth take back the...
Ken has a couple of good stories about this. So.
Yeah, the CPATH stuff.
Sorry, Ken. Can you pick up? Will you be able to remember where you were?
Yeah, they explained to me that it was inappropriate for me to be attempting to still be in women's spaces because of my male privilege. I no longer had any right to be there. And what I should be doing was making room for trans women to be in women's spaces. And all through our history, we've been outnumbered by the women. Right? The trans women have always outnumbered the trans men.
Yes.
And they've always been very comfortable silencing the women from as soon as we're in the groups. The trans women are very comfortable silencing and directing the narrative and directing what's appropriate, acceptable, and unacceptable. And yeah, it was explained to me that I should be attempting to access men's spaces because now I was a man.
Yes.
And, I was luckily, like, I live with a history of childhood sexual exploitation. And I accessed my counseling for that as a woman in Vancouver prior to my starting to transition. My brother started accessing services about 2 years after I was accessing, and
Oh, that's a shame. Damn it. Well, it's just one of those things. It's like if it's going to be off a phone in the middle of nowhere, I guess we're going to have these problems. He's coming on in a different one. This might work. Hold on a sec.
Oh, we've got him twice.
Yeah, let's see. This might work. Hi, Kenneth. Keep going. We covered for you. You're okay.
yeah, sorry about that, guys. But
yeah,
he went to BC Male Survivors, and going there, he was required to access services as a male with both F to M's and M to F's. So he didn't have a male-only space in which to deal with his sex as a male. And in the years, like in the last 2 years, we've talked a little bit about what that was like for him. And he very much felt silenced at times regarding issues he dealt with as a male and the females that were involved in his childhood sexual exploitation, and not being safe talking about that because there were other females there.
I guess it's this
because
kind
of the
because of the
F to M's in the room, like the female.
Oh, yes. Yeah. But I guess this is what's going to happen when you get this kind of upside down version of reality where no one is allowed to talk about the reality of their situation. And in fact, the whole world is meant to participate in the kind of upside down ideology of it. Aaron, Terrell, you're nodding a lot. What?
I'm just in agreement with you there.
Yeah.
It like with Ken's brother's situation, it's basically what these very, very vital and serious services are being just completely destroyed in the sake of, like, for this pantomime validation, which it's beyond tragic.
Yeah, like I know that a friend of mine in Scotland as well pointed out that trans women who have had the full procedure, shall we say, have to go to gynecologists in the UK, who are not trained to deal with their genitalia, So there's a very real case where engaging in the fiction that trans women are exactly the same as women is actually incredibly harmful to them. It's these conversations that we're being prevented from having by people like Morgana Ogre.
I really feel like we need services to help us, if someone's really struggling because their dysphoria is such that they're struggling to relate to their own biology. I feel like we need support to deal with that distress rather than trying to rewrite reality, because no matter how bad my dysphoria is, no matter how much I might, you want to be male and want to be perceived as male, I still have female biology, and that's going to have, especially as I'm aging, and that's what these, I think the young people don't realize, your body's going to age at some point, and it's not going to cooperate with you in the ways that you want it to, and you're going to have to think about, as my body ages and I'm developing certain conditions, male bodies and female bodies respond to different medications differently, and we have different health needs. And a lot of people don't get proper medical treatment because they don't want to use accurate language, and they don't want to acknowledge certain parts of their body.
Mm-hmm.
There was a newspaper report that was brought to my attention just yesterday of a trans man that died of ovarian cancer, a very female disease, but I don't know how often that individual was going for pelvic exams and getting the kind of medical care that
they actually needed.
That it actually needed. So
yeah, I mean, it's like there seems to be an effort across the board to remove the trans experience, even from the experience of dysphoria. I know I saw something I saw a news story saying that Amazon said they were going to ban any book that described trans people as people having dysphoria, which seemed extraordinary to me. Isn't that like what a trans person is someone who suffers from dysphoria?
Yeah, I don't get it either. I mean, what it's turned into is that everyone just gets to choose their own sex.
Right.
That's basically what this has turned into. If there's no condition of any kind, everyone just gets to choose, and we're going to affirm them. And anyone for any reason that thinks that being the opposite sex is more desirable to them, whether that's childhood sexual trauma or whatever. Like, I could think of infinite number of reasons for why someone might feel like they would benefit in some way from being the opposite sex. So if we just get to choose, are people really surprised that we're seeing more and more and more young people in gender clinics these days? Like, it's I don't understand what people think that trans is if it's not about gender dysphoria.
It seems like it's not even about choosing your own sex. It's about choosing to be trans, which in effect is like opting into a social club or a political movement or a religion, and altering your body in some extent is how you signal your inclusion in trans, whatever that means at this point. But a lot of people, younger people, it seems, are opting for that. Like, they think of trans is like the kind of, queer, let's say, is basically a religion at this point. It's just like the hippest of religion that any young person could belong to. And you can't really choose your sexual orientation. I mean, now they're saying that you can, and people need to get over their, genital fetishes or whatever. But they're saying that basically that it seems to be the case that trans is what you can choose in order to opt into this great queer club, and all you have to do is maybe take some hormones, or maybe even not take some hormones, maybe just claim to be trans or non-binary, whatever that means. It doesn't mean anything other than a group affiliation.
Yeah, and it seems to me though that that one thing that young women who historically have been the most susceptible to thinking they were trans or identifying as trans, the process they go through is much more what would you call it? Well, it's much more serious than the process men are seen to allowed to go through. We're often told that of the female penis, and that we're told that lesbians can have a penis and so on. Whereas it seems to me that women are encouraged to get top surgery. That there is a much more of a kind of what would the word be? A physical
Invasive.
stamp. Yeah, invasive maybe, but it feels to me like this is a decision that a lot of young girls might be taking for various reasons. Some of which, as you say, are due to fashion or political ideology, political affiliation, tribal affiliation. But the effects on their bodies are much more serious. I mean, you three have obviously gone through substantial changes to your body. Is there anything you would like to say to any young girl who might be watching, who might feel a fleeting sense of this is what they might want to do?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I guess I would just, the word of caution I would give is it's hard to go through. It's I know it's quite glamorized and is marketed in such a way that it really, I think, minimizes the trauma that we experience going through these procedures, like having the double mastectomy and wearing these drains that are draining fluid from your chest for a while. I mean, it's gruesome, it's painful. And I think I'm the only one of this group that's had the metoidioplasty, and that is, between phalloplasty and metoidioplasty is the least complicated, but it's still really awful surgery to go through. It's painful. There's a very high complication rate, and outcomes aren't great. The surgeon that I went to boasts very low complication rates, and yet every single person I know that's been to him has had a complication of one kind or another. And he did admit to one person that I know that I met in the recovery center there, that he only considers a complication if it can never be resolved. So someone could have what I would consider a complication, like if it's I mean, mine burst open in two places and needed to be surgically repaired later. So to me, that's a complication, but he wouldn't consider that a complication because it was eventually surgically repaired. So the whole thing is very misleading.
Scott Nugent was saying that it's a bit of a wild west amongst doctors at the moment. Would you agree with that?
It seems that way. I mean, Scott's done a lot of research. I went to the same surgeon that Scott did, and Scott's done a lot of research about that individual surgeon. I was aware that the surgeon moved from California to Texas, and that there had been some malpractice cases ongoing. But Scott explains it really well, that the reason why these surgeons like him are moving to Texas is because their laws are different and they're protected from malpractice suits. So I didn't realize that he's actually not allowed to practice in California. That's why he moved. Wow. These aren't the stories that people are being told when they're considering these procedures. But I wanted to pick up something you said about the difference between the female and trans women and trans men surgeries, because Ken has an interesting story to tell about this, that for a long time here in BC, trans men didn't have funding for bottom surgery, whereas the women had it for many years prior to us receiving that option, even though there is a surgeon here in Canada that does that. Ken, you were telling me the other day that, because you were kind of in the community at that time, and someone made a comment about, do you remember that comment that you made about from a trans woman?
When I started talking in the trans health support group about looking up what procedures I would need to do to get phalloplasty, because at that time I thought I wanted access to it. Trans women afterwards, several of them came to me and said, trans women have access to vaginoplasty, and the only way for you to get access to having phalloplasty funded would be to fight on the grounds of sex-based discrimination. Therefore, it's not appropriate for you to try to get a phalloplasty because that could endanger trans women being able to get vaginoplasties, because equality could look like the BC government simply eliminating access to both surgeries.
Right.
And then I actually looked into the status of phalloplasty funding in BC. Like, I spent 6 months digging into things. All that needed to be done was for trans men to ask for access to the surgery. Literally, there was already a phone number to contact at BCMSP, and you just needed to get your doctor to send in a referral request saying, so what was the doctor said, my patient Kenneth Anderson, at that time I had had my hysterectomy. I had been on testosterone for 2 years, and I wanted to get a phalloplasty and to have it funded by BCMSP. And when enough trans guys finally did that, the province funded it, because all the background research had already been done, but nobody was asking for the procedure to be done.
Right.
So literally, they just needed the population to show an interest.
Yeah, and there we have again, like, when often it seems to me that trans men are used a lot by the kind of ideological warriors of the other side. The process seems a lot more convincing, and you'll often see people showing a picture of Buck, for instance, and saying, "Would you let Buck into a woman's toilet," or something like this, but then they don't follow through by any kind of consistent and sustained concern about the welfare of trans men. Trans men seem to disappear, and again, I wonder whether that's because of being born a natal female, whether there's that kind of social conditioning that trans men are quieter and less less forthright. I mean, Kenneth's story would seem to bear that out.
Yeah, we on our own podcast yesterday, we had a conversation with a lovely trans woman that we've been getting to know, and she has a term for that. I don't remember what it is now, but how trans men kind of get deployed into these situations when it serves their purpose, but they're not actually interested in. Once we open our mouths and start having an opinion to speak for ourselves, let's get back behind us now.
Yeah. It's so funny. I think that's one of the things that sounds most promising and best about your group, is that it will give trans men a voice that perhaps they haven't had up until now.
I hope so. I hope it provides people with a sense of safety to start doing that. Anyone that does want to come forward, even anonymously, to get their story out, we want to be the storytellers, and help people feel safe to do that and start to push back in whatever capacity they feel comfortable doing that.
If there's anything I can do in terms of publishing stories or anything like that, or amplifying anything, please let me know, because I think it sounds like a great initiative. Is there anything else that people can do? Do you have a Twitter, an email, and stuff like that to contact that I could put in the bits below?
Yeah. We maybe I'll send you the link to the Gender Dysphoria Alliance website. We're just in the process of rebranding it so that we can go international. So the branding part of it's done, but we're just working out some organizational structure now that we're getting big enough to start doing that. It's no longer just a couple of us doing it. So we're going to work on an organizational structure, and we'll publish a mission that just so everyone's really clear on what we're doing. But for now, people are welcome to visit the site and the resources we have there.
Okay.
Yeah, and if any UK trans men or trans women out there want to join our cause, please hit us up.
Okay, great. I'll try and include everything that will allow them to do so. Is there anything else before we go that you'd like to say? I think have we covered everything? I mean, we couldn't have covered everything, but have we covered enough for this particular section?
We covered everything I'd hoped to.
Good, good. Well, Kenneth, good luck on the road. I don't know where you are at the moment, but I hope you'll come by again. I hope you all will, and let me know how it's going. It's obviously very early days for the organization yet, but I wish you nothing but success, because this conversation needs more trans men in it. Because you know, at the moment there are far too many entitled, aggressive males who are speaking over everyone.
And it's important to remember too that the vast majority of youth coming into gender clinics are natal females.
Yes.
So I think it is important now more than ever, now that we've tipped the scales and there's far more females transitioning to male, that you know, just to use that language, not literally, but
no, sure,
it's important that we're speaking, because it directly impacts all of those young people that are seeking services.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. There needs to be a little bit more kind of reality-based conversation about this, and I can't think of you know, better people to hold it. So thank you very, very much for joining me, and best of luck with it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Stick around for 1 second. I'll say goodbye. I'll say goodbye to everyone else. Goodbye, everyone. I'll see you on Wednesday for another mess we're in. And my thanks again to Aaron, and Kenneth. All right. Bye-bye.